Greetings, and welcome back to LA Quill. Today we're going to talk about one of the most common challenges fantasy writers face, world building without dumping. More specifically, how do you take all the fascinating lore you've created and weave it into your story in a way that feels natural, engaging, and immersive, instead of overwhelming your reader? If you spent any amount of time creating a fantasy world, you know how easy it is to fall in love with the details. Maybe you've designed entire kingdoms. Maybe you've created religions, magical traditions, family lineages, trade routes, ancient wars, or even complete languages. World building is one of the great joys of writing fantasy. It's often the thing that draws us into the genre in the first place. The problem is that once we've built all these wonderful details, we naturally want readers to appreciate them too. After all, if you spent 3 weeks figuring out the succession laws of a fictional empire, surely someone else should know about them. Unfortunately, readers and writers don't experience stories the same way. As writers, we know the entire iceberg beneath the surface. We know the history. We know the politics. We know the mythology. We know why the eastern provinces hate the western provinces and why nobody trusts the royal family. Readers, however, only know what appears on the page. And, more importantly, readers usually care about story before they care about lore. That's where info dumping becomes a real problem. An info dump occurs when the story pauses so that the author can explain something. Sometimes it's a page-long history lesson. Sometimes it's a lecture disguised as dialogue. Sometimes it's a paragraph that feels like it was copied directly from the author's world-building notebook. The issue isn't that the information is bad. The issue is that the information arrives before the reader has a reason to care about it. Think about strangers meeting at a party. If someone walks up and immediately spends 30 minutes explaining their entire family tree, you're probably going to lose interest pretty quickly. But if you get to know them first, if they tell an interesting story, if they make you curious, suddenly those details become more meaningful. World building works just the same way. One of the best ways to avoid info dumping is to start with character instead of culture. Readers connect with people long before they connect with political systems. When we meet a protagonist, we're immediately looking for things we understand. What does this person want? What are they afraid of? What problems are they facing? And why should we care about them? The world becomes interesting because it affects the character. Imagine a young apprentice trying to earn admission into a magical academy. You could spend several paragraphs explaining how the academy was founded, how its departments are organized, and how magical education evolved over the centuries. Or you could simply show the apprentice standing outside the gates, nervous and hopeful, clutching an acceptance letter with trembling hands. Suddenly, the academy matters because it matters to someone. The world becomes personal. This principle applies almost everywhere in fantasy writing. A character doesn't think about their government the way a history textbook does. They think about the taxes they can't afford. They think about unfair laws. They think about whether the king can protect them from danger. A character doesn't think about religion the way a scholar might. They think about rituals they grew up with and prayers they say when they're afraid, or traditions that shape their daily lives. By filtering the world through character perspective, you reveal information while simultaneously building emotional connection. Another powerful technique is to bake your world building directly into the action. Readers are remarkably good at absorbing information when something interesting is happening. Imagine you're trying to establish that two nations are at war. A less effective approach might be opening with several paragraphs detailing the origins of the conflict, the major battles, the political tensions between both sides. A stronger approach might involve a merchant arguing with guards because supply caravans are being delayed. Maybe refugees arrive at the city gates. Maybe soldiers patrol the streets. Maybe prices have doubled because trade routes have become dangerous. Without ever stopping the story, you've communicated that a war exists and that it has consequences. The key difference is that the information becomes part of the scene rather than just getting in the way and interrupting it. Readers don't feel like they're studying your world, they feel like they're experiencing it. And let's talk about dialogue, because dialogue is where many fantasy writers accidentally create some of their largest info dumps. You've probably encountered lines like this before. As you know, Captain, the kingdom has been ruled by the House of Valerian for 400 years since the Dragon Wars ended. Well, the problem is obvious. The captain already knows that. Of course he does. The speaker knows that. The conversation exists solely because the author wants the reader to know it. People rarely explain things that everybody in the conversation already understands. You know that from your just regular, everyday, real conversations. Instead, dialogue should have purpose. Characters should speak because they want something. Maybe they're persuading something. Maybe they're arguing. Maybe they're teaching a child. Maybe they're manipulating an enemy. Maybe they're revealing a secret. When information emerges from genuine character motivations, it feels a lot more natural. Imagine a young recruit asking why everyone becomes nervous whenever a certain noble family enters the room. Now, there's a reason for another character to explain history. The explanation serves the story because someone in the scene genuinely needs that information. The context creates credibility. One of the most difficult lessons for fantasy writers to learn is to let readers be confused for a little while. Not lost, not frustrated, just curious. Many writers panic the moment a reader encounters an unfamiliar term. A magical order gets mentioned, an ancient battle is referenced, a strange holiday appears in conversation. The instinct is to stop everything and explain it right now immediately. But mystery is not your enemy. Mystery is one of the engines that keeps readers turning pages. When readers encounter something intriguing, well, they begin asking a few well-placed questions. Questions create curiosity. Curiosity creates engagement. Engagement keeps people reading. Now think about some of your favorite fantasy stories. Many of them introduce concepts long before fully explaining the term. Readers encounter unfamiliar names and places and creatures and traditions. At first, they only understand a little bit. Over time, additional details gradually fill in the gaps. This process allows the world to feel larger and more authentic. After all, people living in a real world don't constantly explain everything around them. Life simply happens. The same should be true for your fictional world. Another important thing to remember is that not all world building belongs directly in your story. Okay? This can be a painful realization because creating lore takes time and effort. Writers naturally become attached to it. But readers don't need to know everything. In fact, one of the signs of strong world building is that much of it remains invisible. Consider a stage magician. The audience doesn't see every mechanism behind the illusion. They only see the parts necessary for the performance. The hidden machinery still matters because it supports the experience, but exposing every secret would actually weaken the effect. World building often works that same way. You may know exactly how your economy functions. You may know the history of every royal dynasty. You may know why two neighboring nations share similar architectural styles. That knowledge helps create consistency as you're writing. It helps you make believable decisions as the author. But the reader only needs the pieces that serve the story. If a detail doesn't affect the plot, doesn't deepen characterization or strengthen atmosphere or raise the emotional stakes, it may not need to appear on the page at all. And that's perfectly okay. In fact, restraint is often what separates immersive world building from overwhelming world building. The goal isn't to prove how much you've created. The goal is to make readers feel like the world extends beyond the edges of the story. That's a subtle but important distinction. When world building is handled well, readers don't stop and admire the architecture behind the narrative. They simply believe. They believe the kingdom existed before chapter 1. They believe it will continue existing after the final page. They believe the cultures, traditions, and histories have depth beyond what they directly see. That feeling doesn't come from endless explanations. It comes from carefully chosen details delivered at exactly the right moments. So if you're struggling with world building and wondering how much lore to include, remember a simple principle. Information becomes valuable only when it creates meaning. Reveal your world through character perspective. Embed details into action. Use dialogue with purpose. Allow mystery to exist. Share lore when it matters rather than the moment you invent it. Your readers don't need a guided tour of every corner of your world. They need a compelling story that invites them to explore it. And when you trust them to discover the world piece by piece, you'll find that the experience becomes far more immersive than any encyclopedia-style explanation could ever achieve. And that's our tale from LA Quill today. I'd love to hear about the biggest world-building challenge you've faced in your own writing, so be sure to leave a comment below. Until next time, may your stories always be magical.